Welcome to this episode of The World According to Irina Tsukerman, our very special series on global politics on the KJ Masterclass Live. Irina Tsukerman is a US based national security and human rights lawyer, as well as a renowned geopolitical analyst. Her writings and commentary have appeared in diverse US and international media and have been translated to over a dozen languages. Every fortnight in the world, according to Irina Tsukerman, we traverse the geopolitical landscape and delve into pressing international issues and gain insight from Irina's expert perspective. Welcome to the show once again, Irina.
Thank you so much, and as always, glad to be here. It's been a very action-packed couple of weeks.
Absolutely, absolutely. And can we believe it? This is the 35th episode that we are doing it together, covering, bringing sense, to all the sometimes nonsense that happens in international politics. You make it, understand. You make us help us understand it all. And so, several big topics again today, but the biggest of that is the Trump-Putin talk. Tell us a bit about what should we understand. What did they talk? It was, I guess, it was a very long talk.
Yeah, they went on for an hour and a half, and given that both of them like to hear each other's, like to hear themselves speak, I can imagine why it went on too long. But there's been a couple of specific items. One was prisoner exchange between an American school teacher attached to the diplomatic educational center in Russia, Mark Fogel, who was released in exchange for a notorious Russian cyber criminal. So at least there's some consistency in US politics. Just like the Biden administration, Trump continues the proud tradition of exchanging civilians for really notorious criminals, at least with Russia. So so that's one item of the agenda. The major talking point was, of course, the arrangements for meetings concerning the peace process in Ukraine. But from the looks of it, none of the discussed meetings involve Ukraine itself, so I'm not entirely sure how that's going to work. In principle, Putin agreed to that process, but sure, why shouldn't he? He'd be getting all the accolades for getting into the room with the US president and not having to meet with Zelensky. So, of course, he'd be happy, but of course, previously he wouldn't agree even to that much, and Russia kept rejecting even those US overtures. Now, US has a lot more leverage. Russia has suffered significant losses in Syria, on the battlefields in Ukraine, in Kursk, and on the energy field, especially now with the US pumping up energy oil, and India actually also moving to US based purchases in addition to the Gulf oil that it has already been shifting to for some time. So Russia is weak on many fronts, and this would be a good opportunity to take advantage of that. However, it looks like so far it's going to be a rather one-sided conversation. The official meeting is supposed to take place sometime in the near future in Saudi Arabia, which is an interesting choice, especially since considering that allegedly the special envoy Witkov was had a touchdown in Moscow the other day. There's some discussion that it might be tied to energy talks related to Saudis and Russia in coming up with some arrangements given U.S. shift in policy on energy. So that could be a reason to tie in these alleged Ukraine discussions into a larger framework related to unrelated or semi-related issues and broader economic and energy concerns. Trump also mentioned that he might be meeting Putin in Washington at the White House, or he could travel to Moscow, or both. None of that has been finalized. It doesn't sound like a particularly great idea in any case, but we've been seeing a lot of changes around Washington, and meetings that were supposed to happen, such as with Egypt's President Sisi, were called off. So none of this at the end could happen as well, depending on how things go. However, there are two things going on simultaneously with this process. First, the Defense Secretary Hegseth claimed that Ukraine will not be getting its territories back, and essentially at best he seems to be pushing for frozen conflict or a major territorial concession from Ukraine without giving any lever regarding Russia and what Ukraine could demand from Russia in return, which was a very strange opening to a peace discussion. US has a lot of leverage to push Russia at the moment. It can give a lot of weapons to Ukraine. The fact that the defense secretary is starting on that note raised a lot of eyebrows. The other is that there was another high level meeting in Ukraine with the Treasury Secretary regarding the rare earths deal, which which would have basically Ukraine paying for additional U.S. support with rare earths that U.S. needs to counter China, particularly in the defense industry and also for AI semiconductor development as well. So that seems to be going pretty well, and I think there will be a positive result regarding that. At the time, all of these things are happening simultaneously, and they're somewhat connected to each other, but there is no clear pattern yet, and there doesn't seem to be a very clear strategy yet. It doesn't seem like the administration has finalized what it wants to see out of these next discussions and on what terms.
Absolutely, absolutely, Irina. There is so much to understand from this, so much to see what is being seen and also not being seen. But first, let me understand why 1.5 hour meeting. Miss, does Trump know Russian? He must be knowing it certainly. I know there are interpreters, but just in this manner, I want to understand. Miss, why normally 1.5 hour meetings doesn't take place before a formal meeting.
Yeah, it's a very strange situation because I'm not to me Russia's, especially lately, has been acting in a way that's kind of haphazard. They've invited all these North Koreans who keep dying. um they are trying to they suffered big losses. They've taken in a war criminal, Assad, into the as a refugee. um None of these things are particular, and we are now seeing that there's financial shenanigans with Turkey over Russian monetary exchanges. Trump also threatened BRICS shortly before coming into office. It's possible that he also touched on some of these commercial and economic issues that are concern U.S. interests, but and of course, the conflict with Ukraine remains a top priority on the agenda, as well as that one remaining U.S. citizen. But it does beg the question of why he seems to be spending more time with somebody who is an adversary than in some meetings with more friendly countries, and whether US is actually getting anything out of this process. Sure, it would be great to come to some conclusion to warfare. Nobody wants to see more bloodshed, but not if it advances major security risks that will later need to be picked up by some future administration.
Absolutely, absolutely. So let's look at the watchers. How do you think Zelensky must be watching this? Because I read some news reports and very quickly I could understand that it looks like, it will be not fully, not all the Ukrainian territory will go back if at all there is a peace process in place coming up. So I want to understand, how do you think Zelensky must be watching this? It is his issue, but he seems to be very much out of the issue itself himself.
Well, Zelensky just made his own territorial swap proposal, which would liberate the territories in Kursk in Russia, taken over by Ukrainian military in exchange for Russia getting out of the Ukrainian territories that they are occupying, which seems to be like a fair end to the conflict. Additionally, it would be good if Russia could be obligated by the international community to pay reparations for the damage they caused after violating international law. That could be a beginning of a discussion. But so far, no one is addressing these claims directly. And in fact, there's been some very strange claims floating about that Trump had at some point proposed that he could take over those territories in Ukraine taken over by Russia in exchange for some economic arrangements with Ukraine, which seems awfully like the proposal he also made to the North Korean dictator Kim, which did not quite work out, and the controversial Gaza uh, takeover proposal that he suggested in during his meeting with Netanyahu, and that's been front page coverage since then.
Absolutely, absolutely. Trump is talking a lot about land, from Panama to Greenland to Canada to Gaza to perhaps in Ukraine. Be that what, do you think, you know, Ukrainians must be also looking at it the same way Zelensky must be looking? Or do you
Yes,
think Ukrainian will be looking at it, it's the end of the war?
I don't think they would be happy with anything less than Russia being compelled either by military force or by political agreement to leave and not come back, at the very least, to say nothing of reparations, reconstruction, and all of that. Because A, there's a clear violation of international law. B, Russia is actually not in a winning position. They've been sending wave attacks of human beings, but they've also been sending horses, donkeys, bicycles, little carts, and even now two-humped camels, believe it or not. So, so this war is starting to look less like World War II or World War One, and more like ancient battles. Maybe elephants they'll get some from somewhere, and they'll send them in next. So, meanwhile, Ukraine's been displaying their own developed, highly sophisticated laser weapons, and they've been at the forefront of groundbreaking technologies that the Pentagon said, including drones, that the Pentagon said they would be replicating in the US in the future. So it seems to me that, yes, sure, Russia has more people to send to be killed, but that alone is not necessarily the way of the war. Should, if Ukraine receives a bit more assistance, in particular long-range ATACMS that they could use to continue destroying Russian economic and energy infrastructure, I think they will be well placed to negotiate on their own terms.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I want to understand now, in terms of China, how would China be looking at it? How do you think North Korea would be looking at it? Now they have lost soldiers, and the way Trump is planning his policies in Ukraine, does he look like to be on the side of Russia, on the in the side of Ukraine, on the side of Europe, on the side of NATO, or on the side of peace? How does it all look like? Help us understand these whole dynamics.
So, in terms of North Korea, they see the situation as an opportunity. They're selling massive amounts of weapons to Russia. They lost, over 10,000 soldiers, it looks like it, but they sent more into the battle. And for them, they're actually more concerned about their international standing than about those soldiers killed, which is a relatively small number. In the meantime, they are opening diplomatic doors with increasing number of countries. Some of them are just Russia's allies from various pariah states from around the world, like Nicaragua and Taliban in Afghanistan. But on the other hand, you also have European countries that are increasingly open to some sort of normalization with North Korea, which is, from an economic perspective, from intelligence perspective, is a huge breakthrough from North Korea, and all they had to do is wait it out until Russia was weakened without having to change anything about their own mode of behavior. So they're getting a lucky break here. China is not happy about Russia becoming a weak link in this whole chain because it puts more pressure on them. But on the other hand, they see potential opportunities in reconstruction in Ukraine. None of what happened has affected its own interests regarding the South China Sea and Taiwan. And largely they're getting away unscathed from the whole debacle. Their trade continues. Russia is becoming more dependent on them, which gives them more leverage for the future. Uh, so they're watching to wait to happen, and as soon as they see the wind shift, they will probably recalibrate their strategy accordingly without ever fully leaving the pro-Russian bloc, but also looking to capitalize on the economic side of things as much as possible from whatever angle they can. Regarding Trump, now he was very indignant when one of the reporters in the briefing asked him why he's not supporting Ukraine. But in reality, if you look at the politics of it, just today, a lot of things happened that don't particularly point in a pro-Ukraine or even a pro-peace direction, because you can't really negotiate a peace with one side. It takes two to tango, as they say, at the very least. And Defense Secretary Hexat's comments that Ukraine will not be joining NATO, that Ukraine will not be getting security guarantees from the US, that Ukraine will not be getting its territories back. It sounds an awful lot like a complete capitulation to Russian demands, and nothing like a reasonable compromise, pragmatic deal, or even a start to a negotiation process from a position of strength. This is a giveaway. This is not a negotiation from his based on his comments. I don't know what to make of it, unless there are some other deals going on behind the scenes that Russia is making economic offers that, for whatever reason, sound more promising than whatever Ukraine has to offer. And Ukraine has a lot to offer, but who knows? And there's no way to know, because obviously nobody released the full 90-minute phone call transcript. They just released a very brief summary that Trump mentioned those talking points. We don't know what discussions are taking place in the background, but the picture of it seems to be favoring Russia far more heavily than what US leverage would need it to be at this point in the game.
Right, right. So my feeling is that, does it look good for the future with a whole nation feeling that they have got nothing out of, protecting themselves, losing so many men and losing so much of out of this whole war? And does it mean that Ukraine will always hold that grudge if it works this way only in the future? This is not good for the world. This is not good for the US, if I see it from that point of view.
It's not good for the US, it's not good for Ukraine, and it's not good for NATO or any other European relationships, frankly, any relationships with the US, because they'll be all looking at the fact that US had made Ukraine give up nuclear weapons in exchange for security guarantees. So they have an international obligation to guarantee Ukraine security. They have not kept up the end of the bargain at all, and now they're reneging even on the on those legal manifestations. They're abandoning an ally in need to a country that is, quite frankly, not very sympathetic. It may be useful due to cheaper prices or abundant metals or good deals that people can make, but from a moral, ethical, security perspective, any perspective outside pure transactional arrangements, Russia is not a country that many people sympathize with, unless they are directly in its sphere of influence. So I don't really see what will happen. It has sent those Indians it literally lied to die on the front lines. It has engaged in very nasty campaigns the moment any of its allies go to have even a discussion with somebody else. We've seen what happened when Prime Minister Modi decided to travel to France and the United States. I don't know what Russia expects a leader of such a huge and great country and nation to do, sit at home and wait for Putin's visits. I mean, yeah, instead of going and meeting other leaders around the world. But the feedback was not positive, so they're not really earning goodwill through anything other than playing on anti-Western sentiment. Unfortunately, when US is showing a weak side, they're giving leverage to such countries. They're giving leverage and an opportunity for other countries to fill the void and to say, why should you trust the US? They can't keep even basic commitments. They can't even do the minimum that their budget, that their visibility in the world, that their population can allow. So if they can't even do the minimum, if they can't play the role that a country with such resources is expected to play, how are they even a superpower? So, from talking, arguing whether we're a unipolar world, bipolar world, a multipolar world, we'll be in a no polar world with the US completely outside the picture in no time if we continue down this road.
Absolutely, absolutely. So much to, so we'll have to keep watching how this all pans out, how the final thing is. These are just the initial things, and we'll have to see how and what things actually happen on the ground. But hope everyone, peace prevails in all amicable terms, so that it not does not leave room for much more conflicts in the future, whichever it is. An individual hurt is different than a country feeling hurt for a long, long period of time. That's a difference we have seen in history. We should not be looking at something more like that, whichever it is. And so let's move on from this proposal to the Gaza proposal. Trump's Gaza proposal. This has again kicked a lot of controversy amidst a lot of other dust that is, uh, in the air at the moment.
Yes, and to be honest with you, it's kind of strange because President Trump came into office claiming to be a big peacemaker who'll be settling conflicts, but instead it seems to be that new ones are about to break out after his recent comments. But to look at his proposal, his idea, also although it's being presented as groundbreaking, is actually nothing new. There's been a similar effort in the 1950s. At the time, the Gaza population, the Arab population of Gaza, was about 150,000, which is a fraction of today's population of a bit of over 2 million people. There was no Hamas, no organized terrorist organizations, but still it was a sizable population and there was a proposal to displace them to Sinai in Egypt. Of course, Nasser was in power at the time. He used this situation to ramp up anti-Western rhetoric, and what we ended up with as a result of that skirmish was the 1956 Sinai crisis, which essentially ended up in a war. This is not an experience anyone would like to repeat, especially given that Egypt's population since then grew to over 100 million people, and they are much better equipped than they were in the 1950s when they basically had a very disorganized, weak army under a socialist regime that relied heavily on Soviet support. Now they've got modern weapons from all over the world, and many countries investing into Egypt's economy, not somebody you want to have a new front with. So Trump's comments came during the meeting with Netanyahu. From my understanding, Israel had previously floated some basic proposal about potential migration of some of these of the Gaza residents after the war, but nobody expected Trump to bring it up at that particular meeting in a public way, because for one thing, Hamas is still there. Now we are on the verge of the ceasefire being broken. Hamas is accusing Israel of killing Gazans during military operations and of not releasing sufficient number of convicts as per ceasefire phase 1 terms. And they threatened to delay the release of the remaining hostages indefinitely or until Israel complies with what Hamas claims to be their part of the bargain. So while all of this is going on, I would say it's very premature to discuss evacuation plans, reconstruction plans, territorial development plans, or anything that's other than taking down Hamas and figuring out the next step in creating a functional governing system. And then you can talk about what to do with the people who are there, whether they want to leave, who'd be willing to host them, who would be doing the reconstruction, and who is going to pay for all of that. Arab states have started their own process. They estimate that reconstruction could cost as much as $80 billion over 15 years. So in their case, it would be a collective effort, but it would not require full or any relocation of any of these of the refugees anywhere else. It would be presumably they would build some temporary housing of some sort, and then rebuild different areas a bit at a time. Uh, so this was the suggestion, the alternative suggestion that President Sisi was supposed to bring up in his meeting with President Trump, but it never got to that point. That meeting was cancelled because when everyone was expecting that after the initial round of either horror or acclaim, depending on your perspective, things would settle down and Trump would either move on to something else or table the suggestion until a better time, or at least keep it in the background for background negotiations with those countries. Instead, a very public campaign continued, and Trump was being actively encouraged to continue along this line by his advisors, assorted outspoken members of his support base, think tanks, media, and so forth. So instead of these things kind of fading into the background where sensitive discussions should be taking place, they continued very publicly. So when the King of Jordan, Abdullah II, came for his visit, and he did have an arrangement with President Sisi that the countries would jointly develop the proposal of that fundraising conference and consequent process with the other Arab states. There's 6 of them that created a lobby related to that. But Trump, instead of waiting for that visit, tried to get the king to discuss the full option on his own first before it was fully finalized and coordinated. So that ended up in quite a bit of awkwardness, and nothing, of course, was resolved. And now the U.S. is threatening to sanction Egypt and Jordan if they do not take on these refugees, even though, as I mentioned, they're still nowhere near where there's anyone to take in, because we're still in the middle of a war. And even though Netanyahu himself moved on from asking for Egypt and Jordan to do that to asking Saudi Arabia to take in those refugees, which also ended in a kerfuffle. Saudis rejected this idea completely, and now they started a campaign against Netanyahu personally. That's all in the middle of rumors that Saudis and Israelis were in some diplomatic negotiation process. Whether or not it's full normalization, I doubt it. The Saudis were very clear that without a Palestinian state there wouldn't be normalization, but it could have been some other mini deal, some logistical arrangement, or some functional procedural that they were discussing. Whatever the case may be, it is now being threatened by these very public recriminations.
Absolutely, Irina. And whatever the Gaza proposal was or will be or will not be, but one thing you predicted last time in the last episode was that this Hamas Israel ceasefire is not going to last long, and it looks like to be very much in jeopardy. Tell us a bit about that. Is it off? Is it on? Where does it go?
Well, so far it's very close to being off, and right now the two sides are playing chicken, with Hamas threatening to hold off the release of hostages indefinitely. Israel literally having prepared its military to re-enter the areas that they left and re-enter, and sending additional forces to Gaza. They are there physically at the Gaza border. And as for Trump, he basically said that he repeated his phrase about hell being unleashed. Many people interpret it differently, but from my perspective, all he's saying is that US will not stand in the way if Israel decides to resume military operations, and of course that will inevitably lead to more destruction and so forth. Quite a predictable development, all things considered. So basically, we will not find out for sure until Saturday, which is when the next set of hostages is supposed to be released. If by that point Hamas provides the information for the arrangements to take place, we will know that the ceasefire survives, and they were just trying to capitalize on the controversy of the moment to test Trump and his commitment to the process. If, on the other hand, they proceed, they will probably figure that US will not decisively interfere. The weapons that they just sold Israel will take months to be delivered at the very least, and in the meantime they can still do a lot of damage. And they got a whole bunch of terrorists to rejoin their fighting force, and that may have been part of the reason why they agreed to the ceasefire at all, to get as many able-bodied men back into the fighting area to replace the ones who were killed. Um, they got many hundreds, if not over 1,000 at this point. So from their perspective, it could be enough to continue fighting.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I'm just wondering how things change so quickly in international situations. Just few days back, just a couple of days before Trump's inauguration, both the incoming and the outgoing U.S. administration both were so happy about this whole ceasefire deal. And there were so many statements at that point in time, and now this looks to be in jeopardy. Be that as it may, what about Trump's nominees? They don't seem to be stopping of making all these controversies and all. Now the latest is Kash Patel. Do you think Trump should be worried about all these nominees, kicking up a lot of dust?
Well, the reason why they're there in the first place is, first of all, they are the loudest quote unquote loyalists out of whoever remained that Trump did not already alienate from his previous administration. Trump has become obsessed with loyalty to the point that he values it above all else, or perceived loyalty. Second issue, all of these people seem to be, part of the same ideological framework and network, which means they come from the same circles, they probably come from the same types of relationships, which means they work together in a certain way. When you have a group of people who are as similar in the way they function and in the types of foreign connections they have and the types of stories they're involved in, you have to wonder whether it's at all a coincidence that the only people who seem to surround the president are people of that sort. It's not one, it's not two, it's all of them. Now, it's also astounding at how quickly the Republican senators have crumbled under minor pressure from J.D. Vance and a few other figures threatening to withhold funding. Some of these senators were not due for re-election for another 6 years, long after Trump's presidency is over. Either they see J.D. Vance as a natural successor to Trump and won't even fight him, which is doubtful, to be honest, or they've been offered deals that they simply cannot refuse. I don't know what the story is, but all of these national security hawks who would have previously been highly critical of people like Tulsi Gabbard, RFK Jr., Kash Patel, and the rest of them, suddenly changed the tune and had nothing to say and just voted for people despite huge revelations within weeks about the foreign ties and assorted adventures and outrageous histories of all these candidates. So to me, something doesn't smell right about the story when so many people collapse so quickly and all of them have been previously strong opponents either of Trump or of some of these nominees or particular issues involved, and suddenly they become a Greek choir of conformity. It just feels like it's beyond the usual political arm twisting and deal making that that is part of any normal political process. There's something seriously not right about this, but we will probably not know the full story for a while.
Absolutely, absolutely, Irina. Let's talk. Let's keep on Trump himself and his impact on Panama. Does it look like that China has lost out on the BRI renewal in Panama, and it will also lose geopolitical influence as a result of Trump's approach? How do you see that? And will China make up for this by filling the void after US's step of freezing foreign aid?
I don't think it was a bad thing to bring attention to Chinese involvement in the Western Hemisphere and in Panama in particular, but I do think that the noise sort of made it difficult to separate the real challenges from from the Trump administration's interest in just taking credit for whatever minor accomplishment they could. For instance, the claim that U.S. ships were being treated unfairly compared to Chinese ships, not true. I think the concern about the Chinese ships being there at all is perfectly legitimate, but the economic aspect of it is just not accurate. The US ships already had free transit. The BRI portion of the deal seems like a positive development, but we don't know how long that will hold out for, because all Trump needed out of it is to make an announcement that they will not be signing it, but it could happen in a month or two very quietly or without any formal signings, just through informal arrangements. The biggest issue, however, is that all the damage that's already been done, because Panama, even without this additional new BRI infrastructure projects, which will uh, allegedly not be renewed, has already signed on to a great deal of them that are ongoing. And those projects will be completed, and the ones which were completed are already being utilized. And China's businesses and military are quite dominant in that area in general and look to become even more so. So that's the real question: is that not only that they've it's questionable whether they've prevented future progress, but that they haven't managed to reverse any of the ones that's been made, and no other deals have been cancelled, and there hasn't been a major agreement about U.S. businesses coming into the area, which is what we really needed to displace China out of there for good.
Absolutely, absolutely. So now, do you think now China will be much more active in terms of helping other countries, because all this freezing of US aids and all that? How? What is your sense on this? Does China, if they want to, do they have the money?
China always has a money to spend on what it wants to spend on. If it doesn't want to spend on the money, it restrains. So the issue is not whether it has the money, it's the issue is always how it chooses to prioritize it at any given moment. Of course, it has been under severe financial strain, so it means it will have to cut back somewhere, but what it will that somewhere is domestically or internationally depends on the mood of the day. What I do say is that half measures are worse than either doing nothing at all or going all the way, because half measures will anger China and provoke it to reactivate even more so and double down and become more aggressive without causing any damage to its activities or reversing anything. So that, I fear, will be the ultimate outcome of these tentative steps. US will bark, it will show a little bit of teeth, and then it will walk away and refocus on the new scandal or achievement of the day. And China will be back consistently, continuing its activity and now investing more to make sure that nobody is tempted by US overtures.
Absolutely, absolutely, Irina. Our last topic of the day is close to is home itself. Prime Minister Modi's party, Bharatiya Janata Party, it has won the elections, Delhi state elections, and Kejriwal, he has been the chief minister for a long time. Now he was not the chief minister anymore, but he was the ruler. He was the top man of his party. All those people are out. How do you see it from that part of the world about this political development on the in India's capital?
Anytime there are massive losses like that, it says a lot about the party losing as much as it says about the party winning. So, not to take away anything from BJP's victory, but it seems to me that the other party was had some real problems, that it suddenly fell after all this time. Given that BJP has been in power in the government, it's now in its third term, and during all that time there weren't incremental losses, there was just this massive sweep. It seems like something was brewing under the surface, maybe corruption scandals, maybe some other problems that are not necessarily well covered here, but it points to something new and not just a process of people shifting over policies incrementally. As it happens, they get tired of one thing, they want to try something else. Major sweeps like that indicate that there's a problem on the other side. Of course, BJP has something to offer, and frankly, it's a very positive development for them after somewhat disappointing results in the last general election. So it may be pointing that in the future they could regain the seats that they lost overall if they continue overperforming like that in other areas, and this victory was a good indicator. And all of that was a very positive step before Prime Minister Modi's trips abroad to France, and now he is about to meet President Trump tomorrow, our time.
Absolutely. One strange thing is, the Congress party, the grand old party in India, that has not done at all good in Delhi elections. How do you see that? That has, this is a
Well,
very difficult thing to digest.
I think it's been the Democratic Party of the equivalent of what happened to the Democratic Party in the United States. It's been um, sort of the status quo party for a lot of political elites. The way I see it, it's been consistently critical of BJP as newcomers, of being aggressive, this, that, and the other. But if you look at their makeup, it's a coalition of actors, all of whom with problematic and questionable histories, underachievement in terms of economic straight allegations of double dealing, corruption, and basically a political cartel that many people were just tired of. And instead of delivering and introducing new vision for a new era and addressing people's problems, they've been essentially stuck in the same ideological mindset. And I think they've outlived their usefulness. They're not able to adjust to the times, and are not able to hear their constituents. They're taking them for granted. And their best line of promoting the vision is to attack their critics and other parties, which never works well. This was entirely Kamala Harris's strategy in the elections. It was a losing strategy. It was a losing strategy for Hillary against Trump, and it was a losing strategy for Trump against Biden, and it was again a losing strategy for Kamala against Trump again. So we are seeing a pattern. If you don't have advance your own vision, if all you're doing is attacking your opponent, you will eventually lose people's trust.
Absolutely, absolutely. A lot changing everywhere in the world. And that is why we come to you every 2 weeks to make sense of what is happening in this world. With this, it's a wrap on this very special edition of The World According to Irina Tsukerman, our very special series on the global politics on the KJ Masterclass Live. Thank you so much indeed for joining us.
Thank you. Appreciate